Coming up next on The Health Hustle.
Focus. I remember back in the day, in Charlotte, for instance, having multiple businesses going at a time, thinking I could be the best at multiple things at once, and so I tend to pick things that are complex enough to be interesting in and of their own right, and then focus on it. And if you can't give the time and energy that it needs, then maybe it's not the right time. And being self-aware about those things. But Humanaut's enough. Like, I go, you go is enough. Like, these are super cool things, and I'm passionate about them. I don't need more, and once again, I also apply that to my life. I've got a nice place to live. I've got good friends. Like, enough. Like, focus on those. Focus on the relationships in your life. Focus on your marriage. Focus on being, by the way, you can't be the best dad, best husband, best entrepreneur, best friend, best son, best brother simultaneously. But you do have to pick your moments. And at some point, you have to be the best brother. There's a moment where you got to be the best son. There's a moment where you got to be the best dad, the best husband. There's a moment when you got to lean into your business. And so I think people who can kind of trade in and out of that and have a good balance tend to, but I will say you also have to have a hierarchy. For me, it's faith, family, way up top. My businesses are next, right along with my friends and all that. And don't ever lose sight of your construct, and don't ever lose sight of your priorities.
What up, y'all? Welcome to The Health Hustle, where I believe that just like your health, there is no one-size-fits-all model, and that you should be able to create a business that fits your lifestyle. Over the years, I have brought on doctors, physical therapists, tech founders, serial entrepreneurs, influencers, athletes, everything in between to uncover how they built their business and the lessons learned along the way. If we haven't met before, my name is Corey Hibben, and I own a marketing agency that's focused towards helping health-related business owners to market and grow their business. If that happens to be you, the very first step you can take is actually signing up for my newsletter. It happens to be called The Health Hustle, where once a week I write marketing tips that are specific for health-related business owners. Or the other thing you can do if you're having difficulties getting leads is one of the most common reasons that I see this is not having a well-defined niche. I've actually created a very simple 3-step process that walks you through how to get clarity on which niche is best suited for you. You can find the link to the free niche guide in the description of this episode. On today's episode, I got a chance to sit down with the one and only Jim Donnelly. From humble beginnings to co-founding multiple successful startups, Jim's journey is a testament to the power of perseverance and embracing challenges. On this episode, we dive deep into Jim's entrepreneurial adventures from early business lessons to filing for bankruptcy and bouncing back stronger than ever. Join us as we explore the importance of doing hard things, the unique business landscape of Austin, and the inevitable role of feelings in decision-making, something I definitely struggle with. Get ready for an inspirational conversation with a true innovator and collector of good people. Jim Donnelly, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great, man. I'm excited. You are very clearly a serial entrepreneur, from golf ball recovery to I Go You Go to luxury condo companies, Kin Valley, Restore Hyper Wellness, and the latest, Humanaut. And we're going to get into some of the lessons learned and all that of all those businesses. But before we get into that, where I want to start is something where you have to do 2 to 3 hard things per year. That seems to be something that you try to stick to. What are maybe some of the hardest things that you've committed to doing in terms of just all the things that you tried? Or what's like coming up for you of challenges that you want to overcome?
Yeah, I will say where it started is I do think I come from pretty humble beginnings. And when you're attached to that, there's no choice. Everything's kind of hard. You don't have resources, you don't have money, your parents aren't coming to the rescue. And so I think it builds a resiliency that you might not otherwise have if you didn't have that situation. By the way, you don't know any better. Like, you grow up in that environment and you're just like, oh, okay, this is the way it's supposed to be. But then you grow up one day and you get into corporate America, you start a company, it goes pretty well. You can get detached from doing hard things. And I think you kind of get sort of softer and softer and softer. And I don't want that. I don't want to get detached from that. And I also look back, like, there are things that you can't do anymore. Like, I can't go to Ranger School anymore. I could do that when I was young and in the Army. By the way, I've never done anything harder. It was the most rude awakening I've ever had. The first time I've ever been punched in the face. The first time I experienced just lots of things. And I look back at that experience and I think it was actually as formative as anything I've done. And so I don't want to be detached from that. Now, in the civilian world, you can't replicate that. But you can pick hard things. So I've done a survival trip in Panama for 8 days. I've done an Everesting challenge where you have to hike the elevation of Everest in 36 hours, sort of 13 hikes up a mountain. You know, I just finished 75 hard. I rode a 100-mile bike ride 2 weeks ago. Like these are the kind of things that I'm trying to keep close to. And I'll do stupid stuff. Like I'll do that 100-mile bike ride. I didn't train 1 minute. Now that's stupid. That's not the way I should be doing 100-mile bike rides at 55 years old. But I'll tell you what, it made it a lot harder. And that last 20 miles was more mental than physical.
Where did you do it? Just on your own?
It was in Columbus, Ohio. It was a charity event called Pelotonia for cancer. It's a huge ride. My dad died of cancer, so I'm very close to that cause. And I do it every year with some friends. They're professional level bikers. They train. So they try to ride with me for a little bit. I'm like, dude, please go. Like, this is already hard enough. But those are the kind of things that I do. And I want that to be a lesson for the companies I'm starting. I want to, on some level, be a little inspirational. I want to be a little vulnerable, and I kind of include folks. I celebrate it with the people that are around me, and I push them to do the same thing.
Yeah. Have you ever read The Comfort Crisis?
I haven't read the book, but I'm very familiar with the premise.
Yeah. I mean, you're nailing it, right? It's like we basically spend almost our entire day to day at a 70-degree tempered climate with no change or challenge, and everything's delivered to your door.
Yeah.
And then we wonder why we're stressed out about stupid things that don't actually matter.
Yeah. My kids get annoyed if their Amazon orders don't come the same day sometimes. And I'm like, this is so ludicrous.
Yeah.
And so, I do want to make sure that I don't fall prey to that. Of course I want to be comfortable as I become successful and do all these things. But I think too much comfort kind of takes your eye off the ball. Too much comfort makes you take things for granted. Too much comfort does diminish your ability to do the things that it takes to start new companies.
It's a paradox, right? Is that we assume we want the comfortable, easy, everything handed to us life, but unfortunately that actually often leads to just more suffering and pain and misery and complaining about, like you said, an Amazon order.
Yeah.
It's a complete paradox. You said a quote, and I want to repeat it back to you because I'm curious about it. You said, I was happy before that. I'm happy now. I'm going to be happy tomorrow. $100 million doesn't change my life. I'm going to be married to the same woman. I'm going to treat my children the same. I'm going to drive the same truck, which you did drive here today. I'm going to live in the same house. I'm good. And the reason I bring that up is I think that's an incredible mentality, but I'm curious as to where that started, because there's no way you were born with that, right? And that's probably, I got to imagine there was a moment where that maybe clicked for you, or maybe multiple moments where that clicked for you. Like, where did that mentality start to develop for you?
It's a few things. I've got a lot of friends that have been very successful, and despite their success, they struggle with certain things. Sometimes it is marriage. Sometimes it's purpose, fulfillment. And I do sometimes kind of look at them and I'm like, I don't get it. Like, you have so much, but I also don't want to pretend I know what they're going through. It's like live some time in another person's shoes before you judge them. So, I get that there are all kinds of ways that people are happy and not happy. But for me, I was just talking to somebody the other day about my childhood. My dad was a wacky entrepreneur. We had a propane-powered car, for goodness sakes. When we'd go home to visit my grandparents in South Carolina from California, we'd drive 48 straight hours. If we ever stopped at a hotel, it was a Motel 6. All these things. But you could think of that as hideous. Man, I love those times. I learned every word to every Beatles song. I got to sit on my dad's lap and drive. I got to be in a car with my sister and our dog, and things that bothered me, I now realize I took for granted. Like when you have a propane powered car, you're not just pulling into the gas station off of the interstate. You're sometimes going 10 miles off the interstate to a farmhouse. You're knocking on a door at dinner time. And my dad, being this social animal, would, of course, make quick friends. Next thing you know, we're having dinner with this random Iowa family, that has a propane distribution thing. And my sister and I would look at each other and go, what are we doing? Can we please get back on the road? Like, why are we talking to these strange people? But, that does kind of get in your DNA, and you realize those moments were pretty special. And, I think you kind of get more perspective in life if you have a solid foundation. And to be quite frank, I am married to a special woman. My wife's a West Point grad. She's super passionate. She keeps me in check. Some friends would even say she might bust my balls a little bit, but I need it. She's what I need, and she's what I love. My kids are delightful. Like they're annoyingly talented. Things come pretty easy for them, but they also are super kind, and they don't act in any way like, you know, they're not pretentious. They're not any of that. And so I wake up every day and I see these beautiful kids walk out. I'm lying next to my wife. I'm in a beautiful home. It's enough. And I don't know. I've heard the saying many times, comparison is the enemy of good. And I just really don't care. I have a few good friends. I'm super loyal to them. They're loyal to me. I'm working in a business that provides real purpose. It's what I'm passionate about. My colleagues are tremendous people, very accomplished, fun, mission-driven. Like I said, my family dynamic's great. I'm super close to my sister. I love my mom. I wish my dad were here. And I've been through some things that galvanize this for me. So there was, for instance, a time when a buddy of mine said, "Hey, I'm going out to California and I'm doing this thing called the Hoffman Protocol. And it's a place where you go and sort of uncover things in your youth, for instance, that might have been traumatic, and you kind of get through them, and you have a much better ability to then deal with the folks in your life." Well, anyway, they started asking me all these questions about, like, what was the worst thing your dad ever did to you? What was, this and then there. And finally I called them and I said, "Guys, this isn't for me." Like, I can't answer these questions. Did I have hard times? Yes. Did my dad take out his military belt sometimes and beat my butt a little bit? Yes. By the way, I deserved it every time he did it. Did I have to kind of figure out how to go on the senior cruise and sell more raffle tickets than my entire senior class because it was the only way I was going to get to go? Did I have to pay for college? Did I have to do all that? Yes. But I just never felt like those were burdens. I felt like they were kind of what made me resilient and made me who I am today. And I don't know, I think all of that kind of creates a person later in life. And what the heck do I have to complain about? Like, it would be pretty tone deaf of me.
Did you think or feel that way when you're younger? Because I agree, don't get me wrong. I carry a lot of the same mentality as you do now. Is like, I say it all the time to my girlfriend and my friends, is like, you just have to zoom out and take perspective. I think that's the thing that most people challenge with, to your point about anybody complaining about, like, your Netflix isn't loading or your Amazon delivery slow or your Uber's late, whatever. It's like, you got to zoom out, man.
Yeah.
Like, right. But so I agree with the statement, but I also know that when I look at the younger version of myself, when I was in that stage, when I was going through it and things did suck, I definitely didn't have that perspective at that moment. And so I'm curious as to, like, where did that start to shift for you? I mean, what was it like for you when you were younger? Did you think the same? I mean, you couldn't have.
Like I said, when you're younger, you don't know you're poor.
Yeah.
You don't know what, you're living on a military base with all kinds of different kids, and you see every kind of situation. So you don't even know any better. I think that certainly helps. I don't think there was a shift for me. It was just this gradual thing that was a part of my existence year after year after year. And I'm incredibly empathetic for folks who didn't have as easy a situation as me. Like, I would fundamentally say that having a great family, a father and mother I respected and loved, that alone is such an advantage and such a leg up for me that I never once felt like, man, woe is me, or this stinks. Now, I also come from a Catholic family. I've got dozens of cousins. I don't think I saw a new piece of clothing until I got to college, because I would always get the hand-me-downs. I'd always be out of fashion. But, once again, you kind of flip it. And I moved every year almost as a kid. So I'd show up and I'd have kind of these goofy clothes that were a little out of date, but I was always the new kid. I was very athletic. I got along with people. So I just kind of looked at it as this is okay. This is like me. I'm a little different. And that kind of helped me kind of become part of the new place. You're the new kid in town. The girls like you. You're a great athlete. So immediately you have a bunch of friends. I don't know. I kind of just always thought of it as a gift as opposed to a problem.
I gotta ask because I feel like the audience is probably wondering the same thing. What the hell is a propane car, and how do you get one of those?
Yeah, I don't know. It never became a thing. But it is literally like those propane tanks that you see for your grill.
Yeah.
We had one of those in the back of our Jeep Wagoneer. So the area you'd normally put stuff in suitcases, it was filled entirely by a propane tank. I can't imagine it's particularly safe, but my dad thought it would be, one of the next big things. He also thought that hovercrafts would be big and lots of other things. And I love that about my dad. Like, once again, at the time, that is one thing I probably didn't appreciate. I thought, oh my gosh, another one of these. And my dad, to his credit, always had enthusiasm. And he loved his military career. He retired from there, and then he became an entrepreneur. And I hate to say it like this, but he wasn't a particularly good entrepreneur. Multiple times his businesses failed, multiple bankruptcies as a kid. But what I appreciated about my dad was that every time he never lost his enthusiasm. And the life lesson that he always gave me is like, Jim, here's the deal. There's no debtor's prison in the US. As long as you're honest, ethical, work hard, do what you told your partners and investors you would do, people are incredibly forgiving. And in the US, you get to start again tomorrow. And that's what he did. He would do something, it wouldn't necessarily work out, and he'd be on to the next. It was a commercial fishing business. It was an accounting firm. And I thought to myself, even at that young age, my dad can't even balance a checkbook and he's doing an accounting firm, but and to some degree, because he was so charismatic and such a good salesman, he could hold it together and do it really well. His last big business was he was an art dealer representing the artists at the Hermitage in Russia. If you go to his house today, where my mom still lives, there is a piece of art on every inch of the wall, from an inch from the ceiling to an inch off the floor. And then you go in the guest bedroom and there's 20 paintings stacked in every inch of it. And it's amazing, beautiful art. And it's from these very talented artists from the Hermitage. Once again, the things and the trappings that come from that when you're a kid, I could go on and on about some of these funny stories. And when you have a business in Russia back in the day, the Russia mafia is always sort of on your heels. And I would just remember answering the phone and someone would be yelling and cursing at my dad. And you just get to the point where you'd simply say, "Hey, Dad, it's for you." Like normally, someone would be like, "Oh my gosh, what's going on?" But as a 17, 18-year-old kid, this is just the way it is. And we always had somebody living with us. Like my senior year, we had a Russian masseuse living with us. My junior year, for many months, we had a sort of chauffeur from one of the Russian oligarchs. We had
Was this because of the business? Why were there?
It was because of the business. My dad would spend a ton of time in St. Petersburg, and then he was just one of those guys that would always sort of collect personalities. And these people were great, and they became part of my sort of upbringing. And by the way, you think you have a bad story? There's lots of worse stories, and there's lots of worse situations.
Especially Russians, yeah.
Yeah, sure. I went on a vacation to St. Petersburg with my wife, and we were like, how are we going to get to the next place? And the way you certainly did it a few years back is you hitchhiked. And we got in the car, and it's this old guy driving the car. And my wife, of course, who's intellectually curious, she asks him, like, what did you think of sort of the transition from communism to the way it is today? And he gave the simplest answer. He said, nobody asked me. He went on to say, I was fine. Now it's actually pretty hard. I've got to pick up people like you and kind of like etch out an existence and have enough money. Back in the day, life was pretty easy. And no one really cared what I thought. No one asked me. And this guy gave this answer in broken Russian. But once again, it's like, Perspective is important. There's always something out there that's different, worse, and, careful what you ask for.
Have you ever read Crime and Punishment?
I haven't. I'm embarrassed to say,
Damn.
given the life I've led and the Russian sort of exposure, I should definitely have read it. But
yeah, it was put on my radar by man, I can't think of his name. Author guy. He's written multiple books. 12 Rules of Life.
Yeah.
What is his name? I don't know. It'll come to me. But anyways, it was put on my radar recently. And yeah, that's the only thing I know about St. Petersburg is like that book is based out of St. Petersburg. But it's one of those books where it's like, it's fiction, but it's the lessons from it are like mind shattering. Like highly recommend it.
Yeah. I will say my favorite book is A Gentleman in Moscow. If you haven't read it, they've now sort of created a show with Ian McGregor and it became very popular, but it was about the transition from the sort of the aristocracy to the Bolsheviks, and this one particular aristocratic figure. He had done a favor for one of the now communists, so instead of executing him like everyone else, they exiled him to a fancy hotel in Moscow for the rest of his life. And it's just a story of just enthusiasm and positivity and funny little stories. And it's like you read it, and a lot of times just have a smile on your face. And once again, it's like this lesson of taking a hard situation and making lemonade out of lemons.
Yeah. Jordan Peterson, that's the name of the guy that recommended it to me, by the way.
Yeah.
Amazing author, speaker. Anyways, so I want to get back to your first entrepreneurial venture of the reselling of golf balls, because I think this is an interesting story. And this started just after Ranger School?
Yeah, so this started when I was in grad school.
Okay.
And so I went to the University of Georgia for grad school, and I did everything very quickly. I had a 4-year military scholarship. Once again, my parents told me early on, you're going to college, you're paying for it. So I didn't really have an option. And so what I tried to do was hack the system a little bit. So I did my undergrad in essentially 2.5 years, and then I did my MBA quickly. So the whole thing was 4 years, and I didn't know the Army any more time, despite the fact they paid for undergrad and grad school. And I chose Georgia, number one, because they would cooperate, and they had to kind of work with my undergrad program at UT. And then number two, they had this entrepreneurship program. So my entire MBA program, part of it was actually starting a business that came from a business plan competition that we won. And then part of the curriculum was getting a few of my fellow students and running the business. So it was fantastic.
Can I pause you for a second?
Yeah.
So you knew long ago that you wanted to get an entrepreneurship. Is that why you went to college for entrepreneurship?
100%. Like I said, you grow up
because of your father?
Yeah, you grow up in that household. Like you're going to become an entrepreneur at some point. Now, what I'll say is, because of my dad's experience, I did say to myself, I want to be different. I don't want to fail and fail and fail. I want to have the foundation and the education and experiences that would make me a better entrepreneur. So
do you think that's why your father failed? Because he just didn't have the experience? What was his shortcoming?
Well, once again, my dad would take exception to me even saying that he failed, because he viewed an experience, even if it didn't work out, as a stepping stone to the next thing. But I don't think my dad was equipped to do some of the businesses that he did. Like, my dad was incredibly smart, incredibly charismatic. He never had a background in fine art. He had never had a background in accounting and finance. He had, other than the fact he liked fishing, the idea of a commercial fishing business in Monterey Bay, like that's a different animal. So I kind of saw these things. And number one, once again, I loved the passion and I loved that he pursued these things. But I did see, even at a young age, I kind of get why some of these things didn't work out. And I don't want to repeat those mistakes. And so I had a thesis about, what type of education I needed, what type of corporate career I needed to have, what type of then sort of things I would need to put in my life to be ready to be a real entrepreneur.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what I'm hearing from here is like he basically just didn't have the background experience in the industry to ultimately be successful in it. Because like I've often heard it expressed as there's, no matter what business you get into, everything, whether it's chairs or any sort of service, any sort of product, is that there's an ignorance tax
Yeah.
that you need to pay to understand an industry well enough to be
Yeah.
successful in it. And it sounds like your father just like never really had enough industry experience, and he probably should have picked one that I guess I don't know what your father's background is, but I would be curious as to had he picked the industry that he has the most knowledge in, if he wouldn't have been more successful.
Yeah. My dad was a career Army officer.
Yeah.
So there's leadership and other things, but there's no industry experience. And by the way, I don't necessarily think you have to have industry experience to be successful. I think you have to have a construct. And I think leadership is a part of it. I think passion is a part of it. I think understanding how to build a team and other things. I've not been the guy that is built on my career, step by step by step. I've done something in the travel space. I've done something in the premium real estate space. I've done something in the, golf ball recovery space, for goodness sakes. I've now done things in the health and wellness space. And this is the first time actually that I've built on my previous thing. So Restore was one thing. And really the only similarity between Restore and Humanaut is they're both in the health and wellness space, but they're completely different businesses. But it's as close to building on top of my last experience as I've ever had. But I always bring the same principles to a business. Once again, I bring a leadership style. I don't do things that I don't have passion for, that aren't mission driven. I have a very specific way that I build a team. I have a very specific way that I sort of start and get traction and philosophy. And I always say, like, my two superpowers is I'm egoless. So really talented people like working with me, and I'm self-aware. So I know the things I'm bad at. I'm bad at a lot of stuff, but I'm also good at stuff. So if I build the right group of people around me and they accentuate my weaknesses, then I can go and be successful. So to the degree, for instance, I don't have category experience, probably makes sense to find some folks that have category experience or something that is going to accentuate our ability to be successful.
Do you think there's any degree of your father not sticking to an industry long enough that maybe led to not being successful in it? Because what if he any one of those adventures, I wonder if he wouldn't have been successful if he just stuck it out for like 20 years as opposed to, I don't know how long he stuck it out. But
well, the only thing he ever stuck with for 20 years was his military career.
Right.
So he definitely had that in him. And I think he was trying to recapture that feeling. He loved it. Like, he loved the military. He loved the camaraderie and all those things. I don't think he ever kind of captured that again until the art business. And I consider his, once again, the art business was funny. I could tell funny stories about his art exhibits at the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C., but him also trying to bring the Russian ballet to the U.S. to tour the country. And instead of doing New York and Chicago and San Francisco, he did Mobile and Fayetteville and things like that because he wanted to expose this to the South where he was raised. By the way, it's really hard to get a full house for the Russian ballet in Mobile, Alabama.
Yeah, nobody cares.
Versus, I don't want to go that far because, but it was hard. And so I saw how that ended up. It ended up relatively predictably. But I don't know. I don't think he had it in his nature to stick with some of these things. I don't think he was ever really passionate about an accounting firm. I don't think he was passionate about some of the things he did, but he was just kind of going to the thing that seemed to make sense. I have not made that mistake. I have never tried to start a company that I didn't have unbridled enthusiasm or passion for.
Yeah, I mean, couldn't have said it better myself, is like, because it's going to be hard. And there's so much, like I said, ignorance tax to be paid, especially early on, that if you don't care about it, you're going to give up, unfortunately, in most cases. So again, I want to circle back to that first business of the golf ball business. So where did that stem from? And I think, if I'm correct, you had a little bit of a falling out towards the end of it.
Yeah, I had an interesting experience. So it wasn't that hard or that complicated. I was at grad school. I had to have a business school idea. I'm playing golf. I'm playing with my dad. And this guy comes out of a water hazard with crap all over him. And it's the grossest, scariest looking thing. It's in South Georgia. There's snakes, alligators, all that sort of thing. And he had this big bag of golf balls. And anyway, he starts talking. I wouldn't say intellectually he was a guy that, I would have any problem going toe to toe with, but pretty happy-go-lucky guy. And he said, oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe how many golf balls I get out of these things. So anyway, happened to be the right time. I go back to Georgia. I say, I think this could be an interesting business plan. I love being on golf courses. I love golfing. I get it. There's some really big things out there with tons of water hazards. Let me make a go at it. So we write this as our business school project. And so I've got 4 MBA students and myself. We win all the competitions. We beat the Harvards of the world. We beat the Stanfords of the world. To be fair, this is before sort of the tech world that we live in today. So like I would say more visceral businesses like that were the kind of businesses you were building. And so anyway, my business school professor invested. We had this other sort of Dalton, Georgia carpet tycoon. Dalton, Georgia is the center of the carpet industry back in the day. And so anyway, I thought, wow, this is great. And I go out and I start to run this, and a few things happen. Number one, I do get to the point where the military says, this is cute. We love your sort of go get 'em attitude. You have a commitment. If you're not here in 10 days, we will arrest you.
Whoa.
And I'm running around. I've got offices in France. I got a French girlfriend. I'm living the life. And it's like, okay, I forgot. Like, I got to go do this, number one. Number two, we hired a guy to take over and run it for us. And my dad at this point had sort of tapped out. He was doing this with me. I hired him. As much as I love my dad, hiring your dad as a 21-year-old is probably not the easiest thing. And so my dad was starting to do stuff in Russia, and so I was left to my own. And I hire this guy, and he comes and takes over. I go into the military. I'm literally in Ranger School. He steals every penny from the bank accounts, never to be seen again. By the way, this Dalton tycoon, he gets indicted by the federal government for fraud. So our bank accounts get frozen for multiple weeks. And so these are all like, once again, kind of harsh things. But I always say, thank goodness it happened. If that hadn't happened to me and that had been just a smooth sailing success, I would not have near this sort of, I would have a different attitude about this thing. That I learned more from that experience about the types of investors, the types of people you surround yourself with, the types of people you hire, the strategies for raising money, and just not taking me a notch down so that I wasn't cocky about these things. I view that as the greatest gift of all time. And so, by the way, I declared bankruptcy. I declared bankruptcy as a 22-year-old because I was going to go be a military officer. Now, as I look back on that, I sort of chuckle about it. The amount of money that was at stake and that I did this for was trivial in the grand scheme of things. But once again, I have this perspective that's very different now about how to deal with those things and work through it. That was a lesson that I needed. It has made me a better entrepreneur. It has made me a better human, to be quite honest.
What happens when you file for bankruptcy exactly? Does your credit
Well,
just go
once
to
again,
trash?
there's a couple of things. Sometimes you file and you pull it back. So essentially, that's how it works a lot of times. But what you're really trying to do is just get to a point that you can have a real negotiation with your creditors. And then you work out a plan, and that plan is based on how much money and resources you have. And as long as you're, once again, honest and straightforward, and you're really being transparent with your creditors, you can almost always get to a plan, and then you execute that plan. And so your credit takes a hit. And once again, as a young kid, I say, great, I needed my credit to take a hit. I remember like 3 years after that episode, I wanted to go buy a ski boat. And I was like, I had no business buying a ski boat. Like, that would have been a money pit, bad distraction and all that. I couldn't, because I couldn't qualify for the loan. And so once again, these things tend to do what they're supposed to do. And so it was fine. And you wake up, I could get a car loan. I could do most of the things in life. I just couldn't do the trivial, extraneous stuff. So, it's all good.
What would you say to your ex-partner if you were to cross paths with him now?
The guy who stole all the money?
Yeah.
I'd probably give him some grace and say, hey, I forgive you, but just tell me why. Tell me what got you there. And he was a bit older than me, so I wouldn't be surprised if he's dead at this point. I haven't spent any time trying to find him or anything like that. But yeah, I generally would say, hey, man, just tell me what got you there and why'd you do it. I had other little foibles of the business. I had some other folks steal some money because you're hiring people that have to go to golf ball water hazards and get in the water with alligators and do all kinds of crazy stuff. And so these aren't exactly, the folks at the country club. By the way, I don't think the folks at the country club are any better. I don't think they're more ethical or moral, but we were definitely dealing with some folks that had some real issues. And
Yeah.
I had another guy once again steal some money. And the way he stole it was he was taking a part of the golf ball sort of, plunder from a golf course, and he'd take like 10% of the balls and he'd sell them separately. And once again, the same thing. I was just like, listen, man, why didn't you just come to me? And it turned out he had some legal problems. He was funding his lawyer. It's like, I would have helped you. Just come to me. By the way, we're done. Like, you cannot work for me. You're out of my life. But I wish you'd just come to me. And I would have done everything I could to help you.
You're a very gracious man. I feel like a lot of people would just freak out and yell at somebody. That's props to you, my friend. So there was a point in this golf business journey where you realized you didn't want to do it anymore. Is there a story attached to that you want to share?
Well, that was pretty easy. Like you would hire these divers. So there were two kind of courses. There were courses that we could use our rollers that we had created, and you'd have two tractors on the side of the lakes, and this thing would work off the power takeoff in the back of the tractor. It would roll, and it'd be these big aluminum discs, and the rollers would catch the balls between the discs. You'd get it up on the thing. You'd have a $5 an hour guy just pick them out, and then you'd keep going. Those were actually pretty easy and not so unpalatable. But there were other courses. If you think about how golf courses are built, they're usually built out of places where there's a bunch of trees. And so they don't care about the bottom of the water hazard. So there's all these stumps. Your rollers will not work. So you have to literally dive. And you're in South Georgia. You're in North Florida. There are water moccasins all over the place. There's alligators. So one place in particular was Jekyll Island. Jekyll Island is a tourist resort, but it's also a wildlife refuge. You can't move the alligators. You can't do any of that. So we would literally go to water hazards where there would be 20 alligators lined up on the other side of the thing. You would walk in, they would walk in. Sometimes you'd come to the top of the water, you'd see their eyes on the water.
No way.
And so I had to lead the way. I would have to show our divers, listen, I'm the owner of the business. I'll do it. And so I would be the leader. And then you'd get this cadre of divers that could take that over for me, but they needed to see me do it first. As much as I wasn't afraid to do that, there's ways to make it safer. You stay away from mating season, all that. But I don't want to spend my life with an MBA and a future diving into water hazards with big alligators. That's just not the kind of place I wanted to be. So the confluence of events certainly hastened my demise in that space, but it was already something like, this is not what I want to do. But by the way, there were also guys that I would go and I'd get these contracts for water hazards. And some of these guys were unsavory. They were felons, and this was a job they could do and keep. So they would literally threaten me. They would be like, if you take my contract with this golf course from me, I'm going to come break your legs.
Whoa.
And so once again, having been through the Russian dynamic and all that, I had heard a few threats before, so I sort of shrugged them off. But that was just an interesting dynamic, and just not a business that I kind of had passion for being on the golf course. And the way I'd get a golf course is I'd go challenge a golf pro. If I beat you on 18 holes, you give me the contract. If you lose, I give you 1,000 balls. By the first hole, every golf pro would say to me, you never intended to beat me, did you? I said, of course not. I can't beat you. You're a way better golfer. But I just needed a little time to sit next to you in the golf cart to give you my pitch. You see what we're trying to do. I'm coming at you with an MBA approach. I'm presenting you a really rational plan versus what you've done in the past. You've kind of ad hoc'd it, not necessarily the most savory partners. This is a better way. And almost inevitably all the time, they would say, got it. You get the contract.
Wow, that's brilliant, actually. So you took a mulligan on your golf recovery business, and then you started iGo Yugo was next?
A corporate career was next.
Oh, that's
I
right.
got out and I worked
You were
at
at Coca-Cola and Kraft, right?
Yeah, I was at Kraft General Foods. I was a brand manager on Jell-O pudding and then Cool Whip. And these were like top of the food chain. These are the blue chip consumer packaged goods companies. And what I would say about Kraft is a first corporate job. everybody there is top of the food chain, super smart. Your finance guy's smart, your sales guy's smart, the marketing folks are incredibly smart. And you worked your butt off. Like there were many 18-hour days. There were many days in a cubicle working on, spreadsheets and forecasts. That was just how you got, ingrained in how this worked. And that was kind of your hazing. And because you did that, and because you're around a bunch of smart people, you just got really good. And so all those marketing skills, you don't have to think about it. It's just ingrained and becomes a natural part of you. And so I left Kraft and I wanted to get back to the South. I went to work for Coca-Cola. I kind of rose through the ranks and was part of the strategic marketing group, developing new brands for Coca-Cola. Then my boss left, went to New York to work for Citibank. And he said, Jim, you got to come work for me again. And so that was a big job at Citibank. And so my thesis was, I'll move under one condition. It checks one of 4 boxes. I wanted to do consumer packaged goods because I thought that was the best marketing foundation. I wanted to do retail. I wanted to do technology, and I wanted to do international. So my corporate career, each stop sort of checked the box. And I also was ambitious about, I need to make money. So the idea was when I would get promoted at a job, the next day I would call a headhunter. Because that was the way that you, once again, kind of hacked the system. You'd get promoted twice really quickly. So I would get promoted, I'd get a headhunter, and I'd get promoted for the next level up. And then I'd do it again. So my corporate career went pretty quickly, and I got to a pretty high level pretty quickly. So once again, I had a thought about how I was going to do this, knowing that I wouldn't be in corporate America for long. And the way it ended was, number one, I was getting antsy. Number two, a buddy had a wedding. And he assigned all the people to the golf cart in the day before a golf tournament. He put me in the cart with the entrepreneur because I had done the golf ball thing. The entrepreneur looks at me and says, well, what do you do now? And I said, well, I'm at Citibank. He said, well, what did you do before that? And I said, well, I was at Coca-Cola. What did you do before that? And he literally, after the third question, he goes, why the hell are you in the cart? You're not entrepreneurial at all. And I kind of looked at that. I thought about it. I mulled it over. And I had already started in the background working on I Go, You Go. And me and my partner, who's still one of my best friends, he's one of the key people at Humanaut, we quit within a month. And that was part of the impetus. Like, sometimes you just need a little spark to kind of take the next step. And that for me was part of it.
What is the biggest lesson or lessons maybe you learned from working from those big corporate companies that you still now use today?
Well, once again, it ingrains some skills that I think are harder to get out in this sort of like evergreen entrepreneurial space. Like, I do consider myself a marketing professional. And that does come from doing marketing at these high-level companies, at these quintessential brands. You just wake up one day and it is ingrained in you how to think about it, how to think about a new brand, how to think about promoting things. By the way, you have to do things completely differently. You're not implementing the Coca-Cola marketing strategy for your startup. But Coca-Cola was pretty rigorous about the way they thought about things. And these are really smart people. So that was the main thing that came from it. Also work ethic, once again, even at corporate America where you're doing these things, these are big positions. Like I said, these are big brands. Like, you're not rolling in there and doing 7-hour days. And once again, I'd look around, all these smart people working their butts off. So I think that was certainly helpful. Yeah. Those kind of things.
So when you started I Go, You Go, what did that look like then in the beginning stages of it? What were you carrying over from the corporate onto this startup?
Well, we were at Citibank, and all kinds of funny things happened. Like, they kind of got wind that we were working on an entrepreneurial thing, so we kind of got called into the compliance room. Are you guys working on company time or not? And so that was another part of between the golf course and that was like, it's time. And the answer, of course, was no. We were doing it all kind of segregated because we didn't want to be unethical. By the way, my boss at the time, our boss at the time, was our first investor. So he knew about it. So we were in good stead there. But it was kind of the end of the .com bubble. So all of my like real friends outside of work were doing some kind of .com concept. So you kind of felt like adult a little bit if you weren't doing something as well. And then we were in New York City. and all the internet companies having the cool parties and this and that. The lifestyle was just way better than my corporate job lifestyle. So it just felt like we got to do something. And to be fair, it was Tony's idea. Tony came up with the idea for I Go, You Go. And he came to me and said, "Do you want to join me?" I was like, "Dude, of course. Best friends, and I love working with you." And so that's an example. It's kind of funny. Tony and I have gone back and forth where I'm the leader and it's my idea to bring him in. He's the leader. It's his idea and he brings me in. We've been doing that for, a couple of decades. And it kind of goes back to being egoless and figuring out who has different strengths. But it was just time. Now, we have a chart that we show, and you can see the day that we started, March of 2000. 2 months later, the dot-com crash. So if you look at the NASDAQ, we start at the peak and then bam. So we couldn't raise money. Then, just to make it even more interesting, 14 months later, we got this travel company. We're getting off the ground organically because we can't raise money. 9/11 happens. And so the single worst environment for an internet travel company that you could ever create. But once again, it kind of made us have to really dig in and think about this. How are we going to do this with limited money, grow it organically? 4 years later, we won a Webby Award for the top travel site in the US. Even more interestingly, we were the first company at the time to be nominated for a Webby Award in a category for 3 straight years, and we won it our 3rd year. We were also getting awards, from Yahoo and all these other publications, hottest thing in the internet. And at this point, user-generated content sounds a little trite, but back in the day, we would go to the Fodors of the world, and they would say, "This is a dumb idea. No one's going to listen to real people giving travel advice." And meanwhile, we'd walk out of there, "What are they talking about? Why do people listen to some old person that's paid to write an article about something that has nothing in common with me? Why would I want that as my travel advice?" And so we had conviction, and we had to figure it out. There was no other option. And so, those were fun times too. I lived on a futon in a 1-bedroom apartment with Tony, with my pit bull, me on the futon, Tony in the bedroom. We spent, almost every hour of every day outside of dates and that sort of thing. We were together all the time. And I'll say, Tony and I I think we had a 5-minute argument one time, because we were very connected to the idea. We shared the same vision. We were the kind of people that, okay, I like your idea. Let's try it. We weren't going to kind of hold on to these things. It's it's my way or the highway. We just never dealt with that. And it was just a fun time. And, like anything in life, things change. I meet a girl, he meets a girl, I got to move out. And by the way, the business is growing. And so we can afford to do that. But it was such a cool time.
I don't take you for a pit bull guy. That actually surprises me.
Well, I was dating a PETA activist, and we would literally travel around the country and rescue pit bulls. And I would always say to her, by the way, there were a variety of reasons that didn't work out. I will say some of that's a little exhausting, but I loved the passion. And I have, because of that, I'm very sensitive to sort of animal rights, and in some things I'm very conservative, and some things people would consider me, the opposite, very liberal, and I'll get to that in a second. But we would literally go and rescue these dogs. And I said to her one time, "We're in New York City. Do you know how many local pit bulls need to be rescued? Why are we going to Alabama to pick up this dog?" And anyway, I had this dog named Josie that she was a total delight. That dog kind of came to the office every day, and I really love Josie.
So it sounds like you kind of have a proclivity towards having a partner. Do you pretty much
100% of the time. I've never started a company without one. I don't like starting a company without one. Once again, 2 reasons. Number 1 is to balance the things I'm good at. Number 2, it's way more fun. You can get more done. If you're creating a big opportunity, there's plenty to go around. I'd rather have a smaller piece of a really big pie than a big piece of a small pie. And once again, I work well with people. I don't have a big ego. I'm pretty good at filtering who I want to work with. Like I said, my first big partner was, Tony at I Go, You Go. And if you met Tony, he's he's the humblest guy, first of all. Cornell engineer, Harvard Business School. Like, he could be one of those guys that's cocky. My favorite thing that I compliment around is he's a guy that went to Harvard Business School that you could work for him with a year and you'd never know it. Because he's not going to tell you. He's not going to wear a Harvard hat and all that. And then when you do find out, you're kind of surprised. Like, why didn't you say something? He's like, well, why would I? Like, who cares? And I love that about Tony. And he's also so fun and funny. Everything is fun. And anyway, so that's the kind of partner I try to find. And I think I've been pretty good at it. Now, one of my lessons is people change. And so I've tended to work in 5-year sprints. And so that kind of also helps you not get to the part of a relationship that sort of diverges, because people do have things that happen in their life, kids, marriage, career ambitions. And so, for example, I think at Restore, that was probably one of the things that I've learned from. I stayed the CEO for 8.5 years. Number one, that's kind of not what I like doing. I like founding and starting things. So at the end, I was kind of not the happiest, even though we were building this big business. I did feel like my partner and I, we sort of diverged in terms of what was important and how we would do certain things. By the way, no judgments, no good, bad. He has his reasons, I have my reasons. But once again, it goes back to my thesis of I like these 5-year sprints. It's kind of how the flow of life works. It's how my psyche works. I want to do new things after a certain number of years. And I'm careful about saying that because I go out and raise money for new ventures like Humanaut. We've done a seed round. We'll do a Series A. I don't want my investors thinking, oh, Jim's in it for the money. He wants a quick in and out. He's only going to do this for 5 years. It's like, no. It's like my construct is I think 5 years is when I am at my optimal best. But if we're doing the right thing, I will go further. But I also want you to understand that I know my weaknesses. And if we've built the thing I think we're going to build, we might want to go out and get a different type of CEO that is better about process and these sort of things. And so don't look at it as a negative. Look at it as you have a partner that is not going to hold on this with a death grip, even if they're not the right person to continue running the company. And I think investors appreciate that. They're like, okay, if we're doing the right kind of things and you want to stay, great, you're locked in. But if we've built this big thing and you're not the best person to run it, you're not going to hold on this like some founders do. They can't give up their baby. And I think part of that's being a military kid, moving every year or two of my life. You kind of move on. You don't look back. You have to make new friends. So I'm just not sentimental. Like, as much as I love Restore, as much as I love Daigo Yugo and other businesses, I never thought of them as my legacy or my baby or something that I couldn't let go of. And so that's kind of the way I think about it.
I've always liked the idea of a partner, but I don't know. I don't know if this matters at all, but I'm definitely pretty heavy on the introvert scale side of things.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think it would start to drain on me faster than maybe most people. I don't know where you land on that introvert extrovert scale, but I don't know.
Once again, be self-aware.
Yeah.
Like, there is no right or wrong. If you're a kind of guy that doesn't want a partner, awesome. Lean into it. For me, I gave you all the reasons it works for me. I'm actually pretty introverted, believe it or not, but I've had to be a chameleon so many times in my life as a military brat that I am good at it. I can walk into any room. I can talk to anybody. But at the end of the day, I like reading a good book. I need some me time. Some of my adventures have been things like mountain biking from Telluride to Moab by myself, to get out and not have to worry about every second having to talk to somebody. But I do like a partner. I do like someone kind of, on the days when I'm off, they're on. On the days when I need to be uplifted, they uplift me. Other days I uplift them. And then we can get in sync and create, you can go twice as fast.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely heard that. I will say one of my favorite trips personally was it was a 4 or 5 day solo camping trip up on the border of Canada.
Yeah.
And I didn't see anybody for days, and it was great.
Yeah. Listen, I've done some of those things and they sound sexy. There have been some times on some of these trips where I'm lying on the ground and I'm like, why the hell am I out here freezing my balls off? And, but those are the things. I've never heard someone talk about an experience like that without some glint in their eye and fondness. Like, and the farther you get away from it, the more awesome it was. Oh my God, it was so awesome. Was it? Because I remember you telling me how your back hurt and all that, so anyway.
So I definitely want to get to Restore. I know you've hit on it a few times, but even between you had a men's grooming business. There was a luxury flipping business, I believe there was, luxury condo. Kin Valley was another one.
Yeah.
How do you decide on these businesses, and what makes you decide to flip from one to the next?
Yeah, so it's kind of where I'm at in my life. Kin Valley was an intergenerational social network. I actually think it was the coolest idea I've had, and I think from an aesthetic perspective, it was the most beautiful thing I had. But it was also the hardest thing I ever did. We literally had to create a social network competing with the Googles and the Facebooks of the world. There's that network effect. So it was really hard, but I had kids, and this notion of a intergenerational social network where adults and kids could interact in the same environment. You'd have all the safety measures. Well, Facebook is for adults. It's illegal for kids to be in. People throw their kids in there, but at the time I thought, there's a lot of adults that are in my kids' lives, and I want to control it. And we created this beautiful visual architecture around a valley, and you'd put your house and you'd customize it, and you'd share all your memories inside that house. People loved it, but it was really hard to get scale. And so it has become part of my thesis: go where they aren't. Don't pick a fight with Google and Facebook. That's a hard battle to win. The Emerson Joseph, the men's grooming lounges, the real estate business in Charlotte, it was never about flipping. The concept was I had moved from New York City. We were about to form a family. Charlotte's a beautiful city, but a little bit generic. So I thought to myself, I want to make this environment around me a more cool place. So we would start these concepts, incubate these concepts that gave a little more spice to Charlotte. And we would take on these weird, quirky things. We'd go buy a bank building, and where other people had looked at it, but they were big developers, so they wanted to put 200 units in it. We took the opposite approach because there were only 15 parking spots. We'd create these 7,000 square foot custom floors, and instead of 200 residents, we wanted 5. And so then you'd go to the Michael Jordans of the world. We went to Cam Newton, Daughtry, and this became like the celebrity residence, totally custom, the coolest real estate in Charlotte. And I was like, I can sell anything to 5 people. I'm not going to compete with the big institutional real estate guys. So I got to do this differently. And it made Charlotte a more cool place. The grooming lounge, we had all the muckety mucks, all the CEO of Bank of America, everybody that was kind of in the mix in Charlotte essentially came there for a haircut. You'd get to know them. You'd be shocked who you get to know when own the high-end health club, the high-end men's grooming lounge, the high-end quirky real estate development company. You get really ingrained in the community, and everyone loves your thesis. We're trying to make this place that you live a more interesting place. Now Austin's different. Austin's got enough of that. Like, for me to come to Austin and say, I want to make Austin a more interesting place, that would be kind of tone deaf. And that's no disrespect to Charlotte. It is a beautiful city near the ocean, near the mountains, beautiful tree-lined streets and all that, but very bankery, very sort of khaki, blue blazer kind of thing. And to be quite frank, it's why I left. I wanted to come to a little quirkier place like Austin.
What do you think the gap is in Austin? I mean, if you were to, step in and to listen to the culture, I guess you could say, because you seem to be very aware, self-aware, and environmentally aware. What would you say is the gap in Austin?
I think sometimes Austin's maybe a little too proud of itself and tries to maybe be a little too cool for the sake of being cool. And sometimes doesn't have to always be cool and funky and out there. And so it's what I love about Austin, by the way. I say, both from a political perspective, personal perspective, I always say to people, if I want to kind of interact with my liberal friends, I go downtown. Like the people who live downtown. If I want to scratch my conservative itch, former Army officer, father, entrepreneur, I don't have to go more than 10 miles. I get out in the suburb and I can get as crazy on the other side of it as I want. And that's my personality. That is actually what I truly love about Austin, is that Having lived in New York City, where if you're not one thing, it's hard, and people really just, I can't even talk to you. I can't believe you believe that. Austin, you've got very wide differences in sort of the way people view social issues and political issues, but people get along. And I do think people are nuanced. And I think a place where, like I said, I can get along just as well with my liberal friends and my conservative friends because I live in both worlds. That's the place I want to live. By the way, the weather's good. The music scene's good. The restaurants are good. The mountain biking's good. So it checks all the other boxes too. But that's what I love about Austin, and I hope that never changes.
And I love the heat. I don't care what anybody says. I was just in Alaska all last week, and it's August, and the high were like 50s, 60s.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't want to live there.
Yeah. It's 104 today. That's a little rough, but I'm with you. I'll take the heat over the cold any day.
For sure.
And then in a month, we're going to have heaven on earth for, many months.
For sure.
I'll take it.
So I want to get into that next major venture. I would say probably maybe your biggest one up until this point was Restore Hyper Wellness.
Yeah.
That seems to be, I mean, for lack of a better word, really a very successful rocket ship of a business. Curious as to where that idea was sparked from and what maybe some of the biggest lessons were learned from kind of building that business.
Yeah, the context, number one, I was around 45 years old at the time. I was in between concepts, businesses. So I was looking for my next idea. And it was as simple as I was picking my wife up for lunch at St. Jude Medical at the time, now Abbott, they were acquired. And a colleague walked by and she said, "Hey, Stace, I'm going to do cryotherapy." And I was like, "Cryotherapy? That sounds cool. What's that?" And she said, "Oh, you freeze yourself, blah, blah, if you feel so good." And I looked at my wife and said, "Listen, that sounds way more cool than lunch. Let's go do it." So I go to this cryotherapy session. It's in this crappy like business thing.
What city was this?
This is in Austin.
Okay.
This is in Austin. It was sort of at the intersection of Bee Cave Road and Mopac. And, about 200 yards off of that. And it was in this crap little thing where there was like a bail bondsman and a law office and all that. Not where you would put a consumer thing. So I hated the environment. I thought the owner was a little too focused on maybe the financial part of it as opposed to the I'm helping people part of it. Whether he was or not, that's not for me to judge, but that's what I perceived. And I just thought, and it was way too expensive. I thought, man, if this really does make people feel this good, I don't want to pay $80 a session for $3. I want to kind of do this differently. So within a couple of months, I sort of put my own spin on it. I went out and found a partner. That partner is, my co-founder at Restore. By the way, for many years, he did not really participate in the business. The idea was he'd put in some money, I'd do all the work. And for those first years, he was uninvolved in the day-to-day. Eventually, he came into the day-to-day. But those first 3 years or so, like I was the GC for building out the spaces. I was the HR department. I was the first sort of person to run a studio. I mean, it was everything. But that was cool. And what we found right away was this was a rocket ship. My thesis was that athletes needed a place to recover and overcome injuries and that sort of thing. Cryotherapy does that. So we're going to get all the athletes. What happened was that tended to be a small part of our business, about 15%. It was the other 80% that was interesting. It was people with chronic conditions like fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, and they had tried everything and nothing worked, but the cold of a cryotherapy chamber made them feel better than they'd felt in a long time. And so those were the people that started coming. That's a much bigger audience than the sort of biohackers and athletes. And so they were like, okay, we don't want a small business. We want to create something that's a little more defensible. So over the next few months, we created this idea of 10 things under one roof, one-stop shop for all of those sort of foundational, I use the analogy of school. Like I consider Restore and those modalities sort of your elementary school level stuff. Like they are foundational: light, heat, cold, pressure. Like everyone should be doing these things. So anyway, that's how it happened. We started opening a few others to test it. No matter where we opened, it worked. And we said, okay, we got something here. And then we said, we're going to create a franchise business out of that. We're going to treat it like a tech company, super high growth. We're not going to be like the other franchise businesses, like used car salesman kind of tactics. And we made sort of ideas like our first franchisees are going to be West Point grads because we want to build a really strong foundation. And the things we did worked, and we built a really lovely business, mission driven, cool. It helped people. Like everything about it was interesting.
How did you know it was working? Was it literally as simple as just the feedback you were getting from the customers, or when did you know?
We knew from day one.
Really?
So the number of people that came in, we didn't do any marketing. It was word of mouth. And we created context for the word of mouth. I would often say things like, hey, you're a housewife and you'd come in for your fibromyalgia and you'd get in a cryo chamber. That says something about you. Number one, it says you're smart because you're intellectually curious and trying things. Number two, it says you're brave. Like, who gets in a negative 200-degree chamber if they aren't brave? And so these folks who I had a lot of heart for and loved their stories would go out and just pound social media talking about this thing is the greatest thing. And so it allowed us to sort of grow this without having to spend a bunch of money on marketing. And it just took off from day one. We knew we had something pretty special, especially every time we would open it, the same type of thing happened. So we knew pretty quickly and we leaned into it. And that's why it became such a rocket ship.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys had a pretty firm, almost like mission statement, I guess you could say, about like how important it is to feel. Do you mind sharing that?
Well, it's probably more my personal life mission statement, which is a day that I don't cry is a day that I don't feel. A day that I don't feel is a wasted day. And so I kind of like to embed that or imbue that into the ethos of a company like Restore. Like, we are really helping people, and so you got to kind of be attached to that. You got to have empathy. You've got to really lean into this and mean it and be authentic about it. And I just don't want to start a company where people don't have that. Now, I say to people, like back at Restore, there were probably periods of days on days where I would actually cry. I'd hear this amazing story about someone whose health got changed. I'd hear this amazing story about an employee. And I would tell people all the time, listen, do not mistake this for softness. You could hit me in the leg and break my leg with a bat and I wouldn't cry. But you tell me a story about an employee that's buying their first home because of what we've given them as a job, or you talk to me about this woman and this man who their marriage is about to end because they can't even go out and do anything, but cryotherapy helps them start walking around the lake again and connecting to what they love about each other. Like, if you don't cry around some of those things, then I gotta say that's a you problem, not a me problem. And it was probably a little annoying for folks, but I would always say, listen, I'm not gonna cry every day, but if you don't have that as if it's not literal, a metaphorical construct for your life, you're probably not around the people that are meaningful enough for you. You're probably not doing something meaningful in life, and you're definitely not sort of living a mission-driven life. And so I tell people all that all the time. And like I said, there were periods I'd cry all the time at Restore. And if I needed to contain it, I would say to people, when you need me to contain it, when you need me to be strong, you will not see a tear. But hey, who doesn't like someone who cares enough about them to shed a tear? Like, I think people appreciate it. Now, like example, my former, co-founder at Restore probably annoyed the crap out of him. He was an engineer, and I would just say he was on the opposite end of the spectrum. But that's okay. I said, hey, you're going to take me the way I am. I'm going to be authentic, and this is the way I roll. And the day that that's not compatible with a company. And by the way, when I woke up after 8.5 years, that wasn't really in some ways the right tone. Like, it wasn't a company built on emotion and heart. It was now becoming much more practical, and it was private equity backed, and big money was involved. And so I just sort of say that's why it's good for me to step out after a certain amount of time and let a different kind of leader like optimize and create better processes and be a little more rational. That's totally appropriate and okay.
Yeah, when I heard you first time I heard you say that about how important it is to feel, it really hit home, just because like I can be a bit robotic at times. And I'm definitely a very stoic person in a lot of ways, but I agree, is like I think it's much easier to just kind of go through the motions and not really put any energy or effort behind things, like just almost on autopilot.
Yeah.
And it seems like you kind of created a culture around like caring and
Yeah.
like being present.
For sure. And I know you get it because I saw one of your posts on social media on LinkedIn the other day. You talked about, I'm in a relationship that means something to me and my life is better. I would say, think of that a relationship as not just the human you're with, but the company you're putting so much time into, your purpose. Like, you got to connect to those things. By the way, I read that and I was like, that's cool, man. I like it. Like that. And I bet you would say unambiguously, my life is better because I am now connected to something that gives me real meaning and feeling and passion. And so, like I said, I don't think that should be reserved for, your significant other. I think you should have that feeling for a lot of things.
Totally. I totally agree. So moving forward here, you've decided to step away from Restore, and we have this new super exciting next venture of Humanaut. Tell us more.
Yeah, so I would say about a year and a half ago, for all the right reasons, it was time for me to step down. Like I said, by the way, it's a joint decision. I think my private equity investors, everyone sort of said, hey, let's think about what's next. And I was like, great, guys, you think this is a hard conversation? Actually, I can lean into this pretty easily because it's time. And so, step down, kind of put an agreement in place for sort of what that was going to look like with my involvement or lack of involvement with Restore. And it gave me the headspace to actually step back and think about what's next. And I will say in this particular instance, it also happened to come at a time that my dad had just died of cancer. I was very much leaning into, as much as I love Restore, I want to do more. And my societal mission of let's make society a healthier place, I thought to myself, there's another level here that's different than Restore. Let me go figure that out. And that's what ultimately Humanaut became. For 6 months, I went around and looked at a lot of different concepts, a lot of different areas. I started to form a thesis about what I wanted to do. I started to gather an idea of who I wanted to be on the team from a medical perspective, from an operational corporate perspective. And piece by piece, I started to put it into place and, sort of had the headspace to think completely differently, had the headspace to think about, if I could do a new company, what would I do different than the last company and the company before that to make this an even bigger thing? And I always said, Restore wasn't my first success. Restore won't be my last success. Like, I'll just keep doing these things. Humanaut, if I use that educational analogy where I said Restore is sort of your elementary school level, which once again, I say that with nothing but positivity. We all went to that first few grades of school, and that is the foundation for everything else we've done in life. But I do think Humanaut's kind of the PhD level. It is pulling all of the pieces together. It's pulling some very hard pieces together. And, we essentially have a company that we say is a health optimization company. It is a company that leans into proactive, preventative approaches that are holistic and integrated to look at the whole person and the whole sort of landscape of their health, and then create the healthiest dynamic possible for them. And it's very data driven with tons of diagnostics. Once again, it pulls in a lot of different pieces. It pulls in all the foundational stuff. I don't believe you can make a person healthy if you don't think about movement, nutrition, sleep, stress, cognitive health. I then think there are big issues in life: sexual health, metabolic health, joint pain, menopause for women, andropause for men, health span, that someone needs to solve in a better way. And then, on top of that sort of dynamic, you're sprinkling in really cool things like stem cells and peptides and hormones, and they all have a theme, by the way. Those are all things that your body uses naturally to heal and be healthy. But as you get older, that dynamic changes and your body produces these things at different levels. So there was a very consistent thesis about the types of things, the approach, being proactive and preventative versus the sort of sick care model that you see today.
I like that you said 6 months because I think that gives people more perspective. I was recently talking to a friend who is like kind of looking for his next venture.
Yeah.
And he's very stressed out about the fact of like he can't decide on something.
Yeah.
And so the fact that you said 6 months, I think is good perspective as terms
Yeah.
of like it takes time for an idea to incubate. Not to take away from the fact that I don't think there's a lot of value in just like executing quickly and learning from those mistakes. But I do think oftentimes we need to give ourselves grace in terms of like
Yeah.
moving on to the next thing.
Now, I will say some people, including my wife, did say to me, yeah, it took 6 months to incubate and form the idea. But I think one mistake I might have made is like I started immediately. Like the day after I stepped down from Restore, I was already like thinking, what do I need to do? Who am I going to, I probably in hindsight wish I'd taken a month to do nothing, to just go be in a catamaran in Greece with some friends and all that. By the way, I did do some of that, but I did it on a catamaran with people that were of like mind and we're like iterating on, hey,
Business partners.
Yeah, what are we going to do here? By the way, I met my chief product officer on a catamaran. It was a really funny story. One of the Restore franchisees said, Jim, you're stepping down. We're going to miss you like crazy. You're kind of the heart of the organization. I just hate the fact that you're leaving. By the way, my husband, Tom, is having his 80th birthday. Will you come and be on a catamaran with us in the Greek Isles for 10 days to celebrate? By the way, there's going to be this other couple that I think you're going to like. Well, anyway, I thought, well, of course, like that's an honor. And by the way, Tom is like the most active 80-year-old I've ever seen. I want to learn his secrets. Well, anyway, I went home to my wife and said, hey, great news. My wife saw it completely differently. She's like, what are you talking about? We're going to be on a small little catamaran with people we don't know, celebrating someone's 80th birthday and, blah, 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 blah. And I said, hold on. I kind of reframed it for her and got her to a place. He said, all right, we'll go. And she's like, I'm not like you. I don't just assume everything's going to be great. I'm kind of thinking like we're going to be cooped up together for 10 days and we can't get away. Long story short, we go and we have this amazing time. And this other couple, the guy starts talking to me on day one, like, yeah, I did this hedge fund and I had all these businesses. 5 years ago, I had an existential health crisis. I leaned into all the stuff that you could be. I'm a Peter Attia acolyte, all these things. I thought he was punking me. I thought he was like, oh my God, this guy, Tom has told him what I'm doing and he's just kind of saying all this. But it was actually, no, he's completely authentic. He's the smartest guy I've ever talked to around a lot of these issues. I love his story. And so I said to him a couple of weeks later, it's like, dude, not only do I appreciate that trip we had, I want you on the team. And he's now one of my partners and I would also say a really great friend. And like I said, at the time, he was this couple we didn't know. We even had an intro call before the trip and we got on and Elliot would sort of chime in on, oh, we'll do this. And Stacy kind of puts the phone on mute and goes, oh my gosh, he's a know-it-all. And I said, Stace, he is a know-it-all. He's Greek. He's from there. He's actually saying things that he knows. Just think of how awesome this trip is going to be with Elliot on the ground. And once again, Elliot and Jane are now incredibly good friends of ours. And, it's just another example of I need partners, extend grace, assume positive intent, project positive intent, and just amazing things can happen. And I don't think we'd be in the same place if Elliot hadn't become one of my partners.
I gotta admire the fact that like you're just a collector of good people. I feel like so many of the stories that you've shared here today have been related to different partners and team members and people you've met and just almost like betting on people in relationships. It seems like you seem to have a knack for just like finding good people and putting good teams together and then letting the plane take flight essentially.
I mean, that's very nice of you to say. And I do believe that is one of my key skills. And I say all the time, like people tell you what you need to know about them. You just have to listen. And so, I think I've gotten to a point where I kind of understand the people that I am talking to, and I understand who I want to surround me, both from a business and personal perspective. And I kind of do that in a way that's going to be productive and positive. And from a business perspective, I would say the Humanaut team is the single most accomplished, capable team I've ever had. By the way, I couldn't have done that 10 years ago, 20 years ago. That is a function of this sort of building blocks and foundational things, ability to raise money, ability to create a great concept. But, I've talked to some, top of the line venture funds, and what they'll say to me is, the first thing we typically do in a company we invest in is we up-level the team. They're like, we're not going to up-level this team. This team is the most accomplished team, virtually we've ever seen for a startup. And so I do think that is our secret weapon, that it's hard, it's complex. You got to have folks that can really lean in, high intellectual capacity, resilience. They've scaled things. And so when you say, hey, we're going to scale this, it helps when you kind of check. These people have all done it, and they've done it with multiple concepts at multiple times. Like, you don't have to bet on maybe we'll be able to do it. We've done it. Doesn't mean we're going to be successful, but it's a hell of a lot better bet. And I think I have done a pretty good job of acquiring those folks. First thing, they got to be a good human. Second thing, they got to be mission driven. Third thing, they got to show me and tell me why they're special. And when I say that, I don't mean tell me about your personality. I'm like, you are smart, charismatic, attractive. And attractive is a broad definition for me. All these things, like, okay, don't tell me about your personality. Tell me what you've done. Tell me actual things you've created, actual times you went out of your way and something big happened because of it. Because if you can't articulate some of that, you're just a talented person. You're not special. Lots of talented people don't do great things. The ones that I want around me are the ones that actually create things, because those are the people, number one, they're more interesting to work with, and they're more likely to create something special.
Yeah, a phrase that echoes in my brain a lot these days is show me the proof. Is that I think it's very easy to talk and to create content and to tell people about the things you learned in different books or from different mentors or whatever. And that's all great. Information's awesome. But like, it's the proof now that I think is actually moving the levers on things. This is why you're seeing so many businesses that are basically people solving their own problems and then turning it into a business. Like, that's one of the most common conversations that I feel like I have with people. And one of my favorites is like, I had this thing that sucked. I figured out how to fix it, and now I help other people do it. Like, those are always the best stories.
Those are, hey, you're motivated, you can relate to it,
Totally.
You're passionate about it.
Totally.
Like, there's a business waiting to happen.
Yeah. And I think anyone can do it, right? Like, we've all solved problems in our life, and it's like, you just have to figure out like how to talk about it and build a brand around it and et cetera, et cetera. But like, so this is something I wanted to make sure we touch on before we start to wrap things up here, but because your son has started a business or two now. And so is this like money driven, mission driven, curiosity? Like what?
My son, he's extremely talented. I think he's got sort of the Vision 1 athletic ability. He's top of the food chain in his classes, all the top, AP classes. He's kind. He's a good looking fellow. He's 4 inches taller than me. And I oftentimes say, good gosh, like, life's too easy. And he has a little bit of a stutter. And, I'm probably revealing a little too much about him. And I say to him all the time, Griff, you know why you have a stutter? That's God's way of telling you he needs you to experience the hard stuff. Because if you didn't have that, things would just come too easy for you. And so that's kind of the foundation. And then he watches me, he watches his mother. He sees the entrepreneurial life. He came to me a few months back and he said, Dad, I don't want to go to college. I just want to be an entrepreneur. And I was like, whoa, hold on, buddy. Like, I didn't just insert myself here. He says, I get it. You went and got your MBA and this. And so, but I don't think I need to do all that. And I looked at him and I said, all right, let's make a deal. You've got all these AP classes. You're going to go to college as a junior. Let's take the first 2 years of the college money I would have had to spend. Let's put it in a bank account. That's your money for your entrepreneurial venture. 2 conditions. Number 1, you got to finish school. And number 2, you have to convince a stranger to invest in you before I do. At that point, I'll be your next investor. He looked me in the eye, put out his hand, shook my hand and said, I'm in, done. And then he went out and he started this little business. Very simple. He lives in Bee Cave. He had a power washer. beecavepowerwashers.com. I was like, great. And he went out and got all his high school friends, high school athletes, and they all kind of either were partners or workers. And they started doing it. Now, here's the funny thing. They did that and they're still doing it. But he did realize, I get what you were saying now, Dad. I don't like power washing. Like, that's not fun. And so he's now working on his second business while he still does the power washing and still does school and still does sports. And he would kill me if I revealed it, but he's working on something that he's much more passionate about. And so I think that's great. And by the way, he's like, Dad, every now and again I'll ask you stuff, but I don't need you to tell me how to do this. I want to do it. And I'm like, dude, I'm here when you need me. I'd like to help you, but it's up to you. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, he should ask me more, but I'd like him to fail a little. I'd like him to have some hard times. By the way, my daughter is 14, now 15, about to be 15 in a month. She also has a business. And this was even more funny. We had this little pond in the back. There was a kid that did a fishing camp once. He went off to college, and my son said, I'm going to do a fishing camp like Will used to do. And so he talked about it with his friends for months. Finally, my daughter literally walked in the room one day and said, Griff, stop talking. I'm doing it. And she took it over. And she went out and started the fish camp business, hired her friends. They now do kids at $250 a head. They do 25 kids at a time.
What?
Yeah, Yeti sponsors it. Poncho sponsors it. Sportsman's Finest sponsors it. And she's got this really great business that she does every summer. She makes enough money that she has money for the entire year to buy anything that she wants. It's really fun with her friends. By the way, it's a great narrative for her college applications. But I love the fact that she walked in, looked at her brother and said, stop talking. I'm going to do this. And I think that is a lesson for a lot of entrepreneurs. Stop talking. Like, take the first step. That first step and breaking the inertia is, I think, the hardest part. And then how do you keep the inertia from setting in and keep it going in a positive way? Like, that's how you ultimately wake up and it's like, wow, we kept it going day after day after day. And I can't believe what we've built at this point.
That's incredible. I actually saw a video the other day that just like blew my mind. It was this kid. He couldn't have been more than 12 years old. And he was able to raise enough capital to buy a house property that he now puts up on Airbnb.
Yeah.
And has been able to manage an Airbnb property for like reoccurring income. And I'm like, this kid's 12. This is insane to me.
Well, I'll give you an example of Poncho. I'll give him a call out. So Poncho's a really cool brand that's sort of Austin based. And anyway, my daughter said, Dad, I see a lot of dads who wear Poncho. It looks cool. They have some cool stuff that I could sort of bring into this business and give as swag to all the people who attend. And so she wrote an email to the CEO of Poncho. She literally got a response in like 12 hours. And the main question was, are you really a 14-year-old girl? Like, really? And she responded, yes. And within 24 hours, now, by the way, I'm not trying to put Poncho in a position where now 1,000 kids write them an email asking to be a sponsor, but she wrote this incredibly moving email as to why she thought they were a good partner. And to their credit, they responded. And they didn't want to do that for some random dude, but this little 14-year-old girl who was authentic and passionate, there's like immediately like, and it's not some big dollar thing, but they give some swag and I thought it was great. And they followed up and checked in on her. Hey, how'd it go? And I just think that that's the kind of entrepreneurship and capitalism that I want in the world. And I just think it's a lovely story. And kudos to Poncho. By the way, Yeti, same thing, Sportsman's Finest. I could tell you these little sort of individual stories about how they didn't just say yes. They actually leaned in and said, I care about this. I love what you're doing. And here's a common theme. All of those guys had daughters. So everyone could kind of relate to, this is really cool that this young girl already is doing this entrepreneurial thing. By the way, my kids hate when I tell these stories. They're like, Dad, it wasn't really that big. It wasn't really that hard. And I'm like, guys, this is pretty special. This is pretty cool. Don't be afraid to sort of lean into this. But they hate it when I get on here and talk about them like this. But I'm proud of them. I mean, I'm a dad. I'm biased. Like, I'm going to brag about my kids when they do cool stuff.
Well, yeah, it's easy to downplay, but I mean, even for me, from doing this podcast episode now for whatever 3 years, whatever it is like, what I've learned from it is that by sharing your story, other stories, my own story, is that you don't realize how many people, even if they don't say anything, maybe sometimes for years, that you're impacting. and they hear it and it resonates with them. And I get people all the time that are like, they'll reach out and they're like, I'm so glad you shared X and X because I was in a moment where this was helpful and this was useful. And so it's like, it's easy to downplay it and be like, oh no, it's whatever. But I think we forget that like people are paying attention, and oftentimes it's moving people in some direction. And so,
yeah, listen, I try to be vulnerable on these things. I try to tell real stories. I try to balance it. Like, it hasn't all been, rainbows and butterflies. There've been some really hard times. Like, a lot of guys don't come up and talk about their failures, but my failures are just as important as my successes. And to the degree someone listens to it and it even is a tiny little spark, awesome. But I try to be authentic. I try to talk about the good and the bad, and hopefully you catch a person at just the right time where it's like, okay, I was 99% there. This was the last little 1%. And like I said, I want to tell people, like, I have all kinds of flaws. I've had all kinds of hard stuff. I've had businesses that have been like so wonderful. I've had partnerships that sort of, they end in weird ways. But at the end of the day, I tend to be friends with everyone I've ever done stuff to. I always try to be authentic. If you really want to know the hard stuff, I'll tell you. I try not to be on a soapbox because it can get really tiresome when people sort of say, oh, you should go be an entrepreneur. I tell people all the time, be careful. Like you hear this advice, follow your passion. And I said, here's the caveat to that. Follow your passion under a few conditions. Number one, it truly is something that you're passionate about and you don't mind turning into a job. Because you turn your passion into a job, it's different. So be careful, number one. Number two, it has to be something a lot of people care about and want. It doesn't do any good to create a passion project that no one gives a darn about. And then number three, you got to be good at it. Like, you might be passionate, a ton of people might want it. You might not be the right person. So before you just dive in and follow that advice, follow your passion. Like, look at those three criteria. And if those things are sort of, doesn't have to be perfect, but you got to have some component of that. And so I do think that I underestimate sometimes people do listen to these podcasts and they do listen. So I try to be like real about it too. Like, just because you got a passion doesn't mean you drop everything and go try to do it. Like, it's a little more nuanced than that.
I couldn't echo that statement enough. I mean, that's exactly the mistake I made early on. Is I'm very passionate about fitness, working out, exercise, which led me to a route of personal training. I hate personal training.
Yeah, I get it.
It was the bane of my existence.
Yeah.
And I admire people that do it. I know a lot of coaches and trainers that are amazing at it. As I said to you earlier, I'm way more introverted than that. And so like every day it would just suck the life out of me.
Yeah.
And so training for me now it's my time. It's my personal time. I maintain it as a passion, but it's not my business.
Yeah.
I have a round of rapid fire questions for you. What's your best business advice?
Comparison is the enemy of what you should do. So I always say a lack of options provides amazing clarity. Like, at different stages of your business, like whether it's because of a budget or capability or whatever else, like, you only have a certain number of options. Lean into what is actually feasible. And then as your business grows, you'll change the playbook. You'll change what you can do. When we started Restore, one thing was fundamental. We didn't have a big marketing budget. So we had to do things that were all around ambassadors and influencers and people that cared, and partnering with local businesses to kind of have deals back and forth. Like, I couldn't go out and spend $100,000 to do a digital marketing campaign and all that. So I didn't waste any time thinking about it. Like, okay, those things aren't feasible. I'll focus on the things that are real.
I like it. What's your best marketing advice?
I don't want to be redundant, but that's probably my best marketing advice. There's a lot of things you can do, but you gotta understand where you're at, and everything from budget to capability to ability to execute. And it doesn't always have to be the coolest, highfalutin idea. Sometimes the simple fundamentals are what you got to start with.
Yeah, what's the Virgin Mobile guy? Richard
Branson.
Yeah, he's pretty great about that.
Yeah, he's one of the few entrepreneurs that I truly admire.
I think a lot of people feel that way. What's your favorite part about entrepreneurship?
I think it's accomplishing things that have meaning and doing it with people that you care about, and seeing the impact that you can have both on your customers and the people that work with you and for you.
When are you the most productive?
The mornings, for sure.
Who is your inspiration?
If there were an entrepreneur, I would say Richard Branson. I take a lot from him, but ultimately my dad. For all the things I talked about my dad, he was unambiguously the guy that set me on this path, and I'm grateful for it.
Tell me one secret or something just most people don't know about you.
Well, number one, I am an introvert. And despite the fact that I'm out here on podcasts and doing all that, I do kind of like me time and but it all kind of fits together.
What would you change about yourself?
Oh my gosh, this will be super cocky, but I'd probably say I wish I was 4 inches taller and had rhythm so I could dance. But I also kind of go back to my advice to my son. If I was 6'1" and could dance, I would be unbearable. I would be cocky.
Yeah.
Like God gives you what you need.
Yeah.
And so those are two things, but they didn't gonna happen.
What's your favorite app or resource right now?
Oh, my favorite app or resource. I kind of lean into LinkedIn quite a bit. I think that you can make some really meaningful connections. You're literally a click away from just amazingly talented people. And once again, if you approach people in the right way, it's pretty amazing who will engage with you and how.
Yeah, I spend almost all my time on there in terms of social platforms. What keeps you motivated?
My family, my kids, the notion that there are a lot of societal things that can be fixed. And I think purpose is, I'm in the longevity business in a way. Purpose to me is one of the single biggest components of longevity. As long as you have purpose and you keep moving forward, you're going to have a better life. You're going to have better health span. You're going to have better relationships.
What's your favorite part about Austin and you can't say the people?
I think that's a dichotomy I talked about earlier of I can go to the center of Austin and scratch my liberal itch. I can go to the suburbs and scratch my conservative itch. By the way, that's not universal, but I do love that about Austin.
Yeah, I've made this joke a few times, but it's like I feel like it's the only place where you can drive a Tesla with a shotgun in the front. It's like they often call it the blueberry and the tomato soup.
Yeah,
it's a very interesting place.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. I'm here to stay. Like of all the moving I've did, of all the countries, states I've lived in, like Austin suits me, and we're definitely here for the long run.
Same. I tell that to my girlfriend all the time. The only thing I would change is I would probably have a few acres outside of Austin for a few animals, but other than that,
one day, brother. Come on.
I'll definitely get there.
Keep going, and you'll get there.
Definitely. I have one last question. Before I ask that question, though, I just want to acknowledge you for just continuing to follow the things that keep you curious, from golf ball restoring to men's grooming and having to wax your entire body to finding your place in the health industry to your commitment to your wife and your kids and helping them to grow their own businesses and ultimately for showing up today. So thanks. Appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. Listen, I've enjoyed interacting. You reached out to me a few months back and said, hey, do you mind showing up? And I was like, well, yeah, of course. I'm honored that you asked me. Number one, I showed up. It was a bunch of great people. I had a really good time. There was no pressure. There was no, I love the way you sort of ask, what can we do for you? What can you do for the group? And I just heard these really lovely stories of people trying to make their way and build their business. And and I was, like I said, you're thanking me. I appreciate it. I would thank you as well. Number one, you're giving me a platform to talk to people, and I love it. I love the way you're sort of doing this, and I wish you nothing but the best.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that. Before I ask my last question, what's your plug? Where can people find you?
So HumanautHealth.com. And so Humanaut, like think astronaut explores space, a Humanaut explores human optimization. So HUMANAUT health.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn, obviously Jim Donnelly, and I do try to be responsive when people need help and that sort of thing. Those are we're building our Instagram platform and all that, but I would say those two simple ways are best.
We'll put that in the show notes. Cool. So my last question is, if you were to go back to ground zero of any of your ventures, because you obviously had a handful of them, and you were to give your best advice to the younger version of you or anybody else starting an entrepreneurship career or business of that form, what's maybe what would you tell them, or what would you tell your younger self in that circumstance?
Focus. I remember back in the day, in Charlotte, for instance, having multiple businesses going at a time, thinking I could be the best at multiple things at once. And so I tend to pick things that are complex enough to be interesting in and of their own right, and then focus on it. And if you can't give the time and energy that it needs, then maybe it's not the right time. And being self-aware about those things. But Humanauts enough. Like, I Go You Go is enough. Like, these are super cool things, and I'm passionate about them. I don't need more, and once again, I also apply that to my life. I've got a nice place to live. I've got good friends. Like, enough. Like, focus on those. Focus on the relationships in your life. Focus on your marriage. Focus on being, by the way, you can't be the best dad, best husband, best entrepreneur, best friend, best son, best brother simultaneously. But you do have to pick your moments. And at some point, you have to be the best brother. There's a moment where you got to be the best son. There's a moment where you got to be the best dad, the best husband. There's a moment when you got to lean into your business. And so I think people who can kind of trade in and out of that and have a good balance tend to, but I will say you also have to have a hierarchy. For me, it's faith, family, way up top. My businesses are next, right along with my friends and all that. And don't ever lose sight of your construct, and don't ever lose sight of your priorities.
Great advice, man. I couldn't echo that statement enough. So thanks for being on the show. Appreciate it, Jim.
Thanks a lot. Enjoyed it.
Thanks. Hey, friend. Thanks for listening to the show. If you have any feedback for me about the show or any other guests you'd like to see come on, definitely shoot me a message. I love engaging with my audience so that I can provide the most value possible to the listeners. Before you go, I only have one ask of you, and that would be to check out the Health Hustle newsletter. It's 3 marketing tips that's written every Tuesday specifically for health-related business owners to help them attract new leads. If you click the link in the description, it'll take you to the archive of all my previous newsletters, and you can decide for yourself if it's for you. If you end up finding it entertaining or helpful in any way, you can sign up for the newsletter and you'll get it in your inbox every Tuesday. Thanks again, and keep hustling, my friends.